I'm Miloš Ravinsky and you're watching TVP World Talks, where every word matters. Serbia's Prime Minister Miloš Vučević has recently decided to call it quits, caving in to pressure from a protest movement which engulfed the country. Yet the protesters, demanding justice and accountability following a deadly train station roof collapse, are not giving up. The most recent initiative, which has crowds of students preparing to block bridges in the city of Novi Sad, shows the anti-corruption movement is only gaining momentum. Where does that leave the country's administration and its president, Aleksandar Vučić? Joining us now is Ivan Vejvoda, Permanent Fellow at the Institute of Human Sciences in Vienna. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Good morning and thank you for having me.
So, some were expecting the protests to abate following the resignation of the Prime Minister. Why isn't that happening?
Indeed, many expected in the governing coalition that they would abate even during the Christmas and New Year's holidays. They expected the same after the resignation, but the main reason why they are not abating is that the key demand that the student-led civic-wide protest is that the expectation to have all the documents that are related to the reconstruction of the train station of Novi Sad and the money trail linking to all the companies that were involved has not yet been fully published, even though the government maintains now that it has been. But the expert commission put together by the university, which involves the professors of the construction engineering faculty, has not given the green light. And thus the movement continues with this march of the students from Belgrade to Novi Sad during 3 days. This is 70 kilometers. And today, as you mentioned yourself, there will be the blocking of the bridges in Novi Sad to underscore the fact that the demand has not been met.
Do you expect the government to make further concessions? Initially, it might have seemed like dismissing the Prime Minister, who actually had been the mayor of Novi Sad at the time when these contracts were being prepared and concluded, would have perhaps served as a symbolic move, sufficient to make the protests slowly die away. But this didn't actually happen. Do you think the government may have too much to lose to release further information, though?
Well, first of all, indeed, this is an important concession, the resignation of the Prime Minister, and may I add also of the current mayor of Novi Sad. So the government certainly feels under pressure to move to meet these demands. There is a political situation in which the president has said that there will be a decision on whether a new government will be put forward or calling for elections. The parliament has to accept the resignation, and then there's a 30-day period in which these decisions have to be made. So I expect that the documents related to the reconstruction of the train station that are not yet published will be published. But as you rightly say, this reveals much of these documents then reveal the trail of corruption, the trail of the money, as in that famous movie which says, "Show me the money." The students still haven't seen the money and exactly to which companies, subsidiaries and sub-subsidiaries, many of course are involved in this project of the reconstruction.
And a quick question, calling snap elections, that would not have been the first time that it was done, right? It's a trick that Aleksandar Vučić has already used before to gain legitimacy. Do you think that this could work this time?
I don't think so. And most experts who are commenting on the resignation and on the events do not expect a call for elections because the opposition, which certainly is not in its fittest form, relatively weak and taking a backstage role in these protests, would not accept, given the unfair conditions of the elections that has been pointed out by various international organizations, whether it's the European Parliament or ODIHR, and others. So that, I think, would not work, and a boycott by the opposition would not actually fare well even for the government, because you would then have a parliament without any opposition. So my expectation is that we'll see a new government with certainly certain new faces, but I don't think that this will be sufficient to have the movement subside, unless, of course, the full documentation where we see those who were involved. And of course, one has to add that 13 people have been already indicted, but this is only a work in progress at the moment on the part of the general prosecution.
Serbia is a candidate state for the European Union. It wants to join the European Union at some point, even though Mr. Vučić said this probably will not happen during this decade. Are we seeing any pressure from EU authorities to perhaps guarantee the sort of things that the protesters want, such as accountability, such as transparency? Is this happening at this stage? And if so, to what extent?
Well, the fundamental of integration and wanting to join the European Union is to have a working rule of law, and that there is a separation of powers and checks and balances. And this is, I think, always the most important task of any country wanting to join. Serbia has been slow in this process, especially with elements of captured state that we have. And the European Union now is indeed under pressure itself to say a little more clearly and have a stand on what is happening. Various independent groups have written to Brussels about this, asking them to speak a little more clearly about what they're seeing. Serbia has been a candidate for 10 years. It has been advancing. No government in Serbia has reneged on that. This one likewise says that that is the strategic priority to join the European Union, especially if you look at a geographic map. The whole region, including Serbia, are completely surrounded by EU and NATO member states.
So you're saying that the European Union is receiving calls for action. In many cases, the EU is quite eager to actually weigh in on troubling developments concerning issues such as democratic backsliding, both in member states and candidate countries. So why isn't it actually doing much in this case? Do you think that Aleksandar Vučić is actually a convenient leader for the West? And if so, for what reasons?
Well, that is a very pertinent question. One of the key reasons is that Serbia is providing extremely significant support for Ukraine in its war defensive effort against the Russian aggression, providing artillery shells through third countries, extremely important amount. It is also buying French fighter jets. And there is also the promise by President Vučić that Serbia will provide badly needed lithium for electric batteries, especially directed towards the German car industry, a lithium mine that should be opened in 2027. There have been protests, as you may know, in Serbia against the opening of this mine for environmental reasons. So we'll see whether that pans out ultimately. So Serbia certainly is in the Western camp with that regard, notwithstanding all the talk about the closeness with Russia. And Serbia is a Western society. There's undoubtedly, if you ask deeper public opinion polls questions, you will get all what I would simply call quote unquote Western answers. So that is the reason why there is hesitancy on the part of the European Union to say something more clearly about these protests, beyond saying that, you know, it is an internal affair. But this internal affair at this point is very big and related to the, I repeat, the question of the rule of law. People, these students, and then the civic movement are demanding that institutions become independent again from state capture.
So are there any reasons to believe that should the Vučić administration collapse at some point, politicians possibly taking over from there could actually cause instability or push Serbia in a direction that Western countries and the European Union would not like it to go?
Well, I frankly and very simply do not see that, given what I just said about the pro-Western direction, the agreement that the strategic path is the European Union. I do not see a collapse of the Vučić government, nor himself as a president, in the very near future. Everybody agrees, and this is consensual, that if political change has to happen, it will happen through elections, which, as I mentioned earlier, is related to creating the fair conditions that are necessary. So nobody wants any kind of violence. In fact, it needs to be said again and again, these protests are completely peaceful. There has been on the part of protests no incidents at all. In fact, there have been incidents on the part of the government and of individuals who have individual attacks certain of these people. So I think it's very hard to tell at this moment what the political outcome will be in the next short-term period of the next 2 or 3 months.
Would you say that this complexity might be the reason why much of the Western media scene has not really been that interested in Serbia? This is what many of the protesters were telling our reporters, that they are grateful for the coverage because much of the Western media simply did not show up or did not express any interest. Could it be because of the complexity? Because, as you said, you have a leader who is helping Ukraine, but also he is refusing to impose sanctions on Russia. And you have this unusual situation whereby he is not really criticized for doing so, because even though he is actually straddling the two camps, at least partially, you could say, he is still a convenient and important part of stability in the region.
Yes, I think, well, there is an objective reason for the inexistent coverage over the first 2 months, and we are at the end of the third month of these protests, and that's, of course, the election of Donald Trump, the war in Ukraine, the Russian aggression on Ukraine, the Middle East. So this is very low in the pecking order. In fact, I need to commend your television for following this so well. We have seen for the first time, just a few days ago, news on the BBC World or on CNN. So it is the fact that it is lasting long, that it is a very serious protest, means that international media have began paying attention to this. And the reason is, as you just said, the fact that Serbia is an important contributor to the defense of Ukraine. That is a priority for the US and the European Union, and for the security of Europe, I would say. So that trumps all other reasons at the moment.
Ivan Vejvoda was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight into the subject.
Thank you again for inviting me.
And I'm Jonasz Rewiński. You're watching TVP World. Please stay with us for more latest news and features.